Good afternoon. This is the second video we're doing today. And as I promised earlier, we are going to deal with foreign aid or economic aid. It's the same thing. Foreign aid or economic aid is actually resources given by a donor country to a recipient country. Usually, the donor country is a wealthier country, giving it to a less wealthy country. But it can happen the other way around as well. A neighbor in trouble is someone you want to help. And in the past, you have neighbors helping each other, especially when they face catastrophic problems. It's in everyone's interest to help, because if you don't help your neighbor, the citizens might end up in your country. That's just self-preservation. Or you have good relations with them, you go and help them. And in many countries today, like the UK gives 40% of foreign aid directly to the recipient country, and the other 60% is given by multilateral organizations like the UN, World Bank, and all that. They give them that money, and the organizations use that. And the rest, they take it to the country themselves. Usually, former colonial masters go to their former colonies and give them economic aid. Yes. So, with economic aid, there are two types. You have humanitarian aid and development aid. Humanitarian aid is short-term aid. That includes emergency aid, medical aid, food aid, etc. As long as it's in the short term, come the give aid and they go. Emergency aid, as we know, comes because there is an emergency. Usually when there is an earthquake or a tsunami, the local authorities services are overwhelmed, so much so that they can't cope. So emergency aid is flowing into the countries, and that includes water, food, biscuits, toiletries, simple things that you need day to day that you don't think about. But if your house burns down, you may need a soup. You may need something to eat in the next day because they are gone now. So that's what emergency aid does. However, it's always in the short term. You have little bric-a-brac, medicines, doctors come along and they help. So that's what emergency aid does. It never lasts in the long term. Development aid, on the other hand, is something that lasts for a long time. It includes building schools, developing infrastructures, and a lot. And includes military aid as well, because military aid, when you give military aid, is preparation for any eventualities. Okay? That's humanitarian aid. So why do countries give economic aid? Usually it's for status quo. Status quo as in one, to restore or establish new status quo, two, maintain a status quo, or three, to even disrupt existing status quo. And I'll explain what that means. As I said earlier, many former colonies still go to their, and many colonial masters go to their former colonies and give them economic aid. Yes, that is maintaining the status quo. Usually, French-speaking countries speak French. So France goes to them, speaks to them, give them economic aid. English-speaking African countries or countries around the world and the Commonwealth, England goes and gives them economic aid. When there is an emergency, these are the first countries to go there and help at maintaining the status quo, or establish or restore restore status quo. Let's say in Venezuela there was an earthquake. long time ago, 1600s. So, United States went there and gave them economic aid, food aid, because it happened in Caracas. There was an earthquake, and the United States went and gave them food aid. They bought food from America, went and helped them. They didn't have much in common really at that time, but then when that happened, suddenly they restored the friendship. And after the Second World War, the United States gave economic aid to European countries. But in that time, two countries were not allies, Greece and Turkey. So they were able to establish friendship, international relations with Turkey and Greece, and help them along as well, because everyone was devastated. That could be the second reason. That's establishing or disrupting the news and establishing or restoring the status quo. What about disrupting status quo? For a long time, Europeans were harassing Russia. When during the Eastern Bloc, you had the Western Bloc and Eastern Bloc. And the Western Bloc was constantly harassing the Eastern Bloc. They had nothing good to say about them. But then they broke, and there was Russia. For as long as I can remember, the West had been harassing Russia, kicking them out of Olympics, giving them a bad name. It was always non-stop. Yes. It did not end there. They went to Ukraine to start trouble for Russia. And that was the red line. Russia couldn't accept that. They told them to stop, they didn't stop. And suddenly everything broke out into war. The war started in Ukraine. The reasons are different. Everyone has his own reason, but I will not go into that. So Russia said, well, we can harm you too. If you come here, because to come to Ukraine is a no-no. It's not going to happen. If there's going to be a third world war, it will happen, but you will not be in Ukraine. We could harm you too. But the West didn't really take them seriously. How can Russia harm anybody? It did not take very long before there was a coup in the Sahel, where the Sahel is a violent area anyway. It's often a coup. Once the coup happened, Russia went there and got in touch, and they established themselves there, disrupting the status quo completely from France. Once they're there, France cannot be there anymore. America cannot be there anymore. So, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger had to kick the French and Americans out. But now they have a new best friend. So Russia gives economic aid, they give military aid, they give them administrative support. They're there. The rebels are there, they have military, they give you technical advice on how to fight the war, and they're winning. So that's another example of disrupting status quo, because especially if you have a new best friend. That is, those are the three reasons why economic aid is given. Right. But the history of economic aid goes all the way back. Unlike what people think economic aid starts with the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was actually a economic aid given to Europe by the Americans. I'll tell you how it happened. During the First World War, Europe was devastated. The Americans gave blankets, they gave food, they gave supplies to Europe to rebuild their economies. Because during the war, there wasn't much famine. So America gave them food to eat. But during the Second World War, it happened again. This time the Americans said, nah, you will pay us back. Yes, you will pay us back. The whole plan was called the European Economic Recovery Plan. And the man who was responsible for formulating that or implementing it was the Secretary of State, George C. Marshall. That's why they call it the Marshall Plan. They gave $13 billion to 17 European countries. 13 billion was a lot of money. In today's money, it would be a lot more than 100 billion. So that is how they were able to rebuild their economies, establish the factories. Among the agreement, they had to modernize their factories, they had to modernize this, they had to do so many things. Yes. And also had to kick communism out of the country because the socialists gained a lot of traction in Europe. And the Americans, they don't want that. So as an agreement, you had to get rid of the communists from your government and reduce their influence completely. So, but that is where to many people economic aid starts. It did not start from there. It has been going on for years and years and years. For example, in 1464 BC, Athens gave economic aid, supplies, food, and men to Sparta after they suffered a devastating earthquake. Yes, all these were city-states, and they helped them because it was so bad that, as I said earlier, the local government, the local services can go. So we gave them economic aid. And in 1592 AD, Japan invaded Korea, and China gave aid to Korea, including military supplies and men, to go and fight the Japanese off their island. So it goes all the way back. There is a whole history of economic aid in this book. You see them, and I itemize them. There are so many of them. So up to during the colonial days, colonial masters gave economic aid to their colonies, and this included ports, railways, electricity, airports, etc. The ports were usually in the capital, and the railway ran straight into the gold or iron ore mines or the coffee production area. So the coffee was transported to the ports and out of the country. But that was economic aid. So in the 70s, it was formalized by the United Nations that 0.7% of the GDP of developed countries should be given to developing countries for economic aid. But that has never happened. The only countries that have done that are Denmark, the United Kingdom, Luxembourg, and Norway. All the other countries have not done that. All of them. So what are the benefits of economic aid? Well, in the short run, medical aid stabilizes, emergency aid stabilizes the economy, gives hope to the people. Because if your house has been swept away in the tsunami, you want to know someone cares. Someone brings you blankets, they bring you tents, and give you clothes, keep you warm. For the few weeks that they're there, at least you will gather your thoughts and know what to do next. At least you know someone cares. That. Medical aid, there are diseases like AIDS. I mean, medical aid is helpful because if you have AIDS, in most countries, people can't afford the medicine to treat themselves. You can't simply afford it. So that's why medical aid comes in useful. In the disease like Ebola, when it strikes, I mean, there is just no way to deal with it without foreign aid because it strikes some of the most vulnerable societies. So that's where it is useful. In the long term, economic aid also helps countries develop systems. Yes, and because they help build schools, they help dig wells in areas and sometimes help vulnerable societies cope with normal life. Those are just a few of the reasons of the benefits. Now, criticisms of economic aid. There are so many criticisms of economic aid. Well, usually the criticisms are leveled at development aid, the long-term aid. Emergency aid, no one can dispute the fact that it is very useful and it plays its role in people's lives. But when it comes to development aid, that takes a longer time. Because it takes a longer time, it is open to abuse, it is open to all sorts. That's why there is so much criticism of it. Now, what are the criticisms? One is tied aid. What is tied aid? Tied aid is aid that is given to you on the condition that you spend it here, or you spend it here, or you buy products from us. You cannot spend it anywhere else. I give you aid and you have to use my machine. So my machine is your aid. And what happens all the time is that aid is usually inappropriate for the society. Let's say you give me aid and you give me a tractor. Tractors are in different categories. If you give me a very sophisticated tractor, it's completely inappropriate. It's technologically more advanced than what I need. So it is not really that useful if you tie. The second thing is that it is usually overpriced because the products that you give are 30% more expensive than the market value, and the open market value. Yes, but about 30% of aid is tied. So that makes aid less effective than it should be, because if 30% of it is tied, then it is not really as useful as it is. But in the UK, they stopped tying economic aid in July 2002. So the UK doesn't give tied aid at all. If they give you money, you go and spend it where you want. You see? Or they don't do about 30% of aid given to developing countries is tied. So that's one of the criticisms. So it is really not effective. You give me something I don't need, or it's not useful to me. Well, that is aid. You call it aid. You might as well take it back because it's not useful. The second thing is political. Is used as a political tool. Political tool in the sense that economic aid is given for strategic reasons. One, let's say you are elected to the UN Security Council. By just virtue of being elected, the country elected to the UN Security Council, you get economic aid, an influx of economic aid. Why? Because countries want you to vote for them. Yes, they want you to vote in the way they want you to vote. And most of the time, you get to vote against your own best interests or your own beliefs. Something can be going wrong somewhere, and you know this is really bad. Ordinarily, you say it's bad. The council, you get to vote for it. Because you won't get the aid otherwise. So that's how it is used as a political tool. Then two, economic aid is given to countries to influence them. Given to countries to influence them in other ways, many other ways on the international stage. There is self-interest. The third one is self-interest. People give economic aid to countries they benefit from. Yes. So if you look at Africa, for instance, who gets the most economic aid? Countries like South Africa, countries like Nigeria, countries like Egypt, or internationally countries like India. India gets economic aid. Countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh. Why? Because these are countries that have a large population, a population over 100 million. 100 million is a large market. So whoever gives economic aid knows that, in return, I can go and establish my companies there and get 100 times whatever I gave to them. So it is actually not aid to you. People are protecting their own self-interest, not you. So that is the reason. So countries in Africa are poorer, don't really get that much economic aid. You have to have a lot of resources which the aid donor wants, or you have a large population, or which they want to sell. That is the reason why they give the economic aid, self-interest. Self-made conflicts. Before the Gulf War, Iraq was a middle-income country. They didn't need economic aid from anybody. Their country was really in a good place. But then, for some reason, somebody wanted to start a fight, and they did. They destroyed the infrastructure of the country. They destroyed everything. So now, you have a situation where they moved from being a rich country to a poor country. And they need economic aid. They need economic aid from the same people who came and destroyed their country, because they don't have a choice. Their whole infrastructure has been destroyed. You have to build it from the ground up. So that's how self-made conflicts lead to countries needing economic aid. And for taxation reasons, taxation in many countries are affected by influx of economic aid. If countries are getting economic aid, their taxation, they may not pay much attention to getting internal capital by way of taxes, because they are getting extra money from somewhere else. That has been the case in some countries, like my own, Sierra Leone. Yes, so the last one is dependency and corruption. Because of economic aid, economic aid creates a dependency culture. People expect economic aid to a point that they stop, that they stop taking measures that will protect themselves. For example, during the time of Ebola was in the far corner of Sierra Leone. It could have been stopped. The country could have been quarantined, and that area could have been quarantined to stop all vehicular access. But the government did not. They came further into the country. They still did not until it came to the capital. I believe that the expectation of economic aid was responsible for them not taking action when they could have. To a point that 5,000 Sierra Leoneans lost their lives, including some of the top doctors in the country. Completely unnecessarily. That's what I think. And when the aid came, some government officers made way with some of the vital medication that was meant for the people. So much more later, when they tried to sell it, months later, they found out, where did you get this from? And came from there. Ex-government officers were trying to sell vital medication, sometimes expired medication. So it fuels corruption too. Okay, that said, I will give you a final comments on economic aid, on what I think of economic aid. Final comments. We need to know that economic aid is help. Aid is help. As it says, aid is help. So people should look at it like that. When people give economic aid, it is never for free. Sometimes, or most of the time, they are expecting something back. For example, Canada, per capita, Canada is the largest mining country in the world. They mine more than anybody else. They are everywhere, mining everything. Yes. They almost base their economy on mining. So when Canada gives you economic aid, you need to know that they want to mine in your country, and they will come to mine at some point. They were in Sierra Leone before. I'm not too sure whether they are there, but they are everywhere else. So that is something that people need to consider. And when someone gives you economic aid, you need to look at what else they want, because it is not free. It was never meant to be free. There are only two examples of economic aid being useful or leading to progress. It doesn't lead to progress. It's help and it doesn't lead to progress. The only two exceptions are Japan and South Korea. According to Dambisa Moyo in her book Dead Aid, so in a 20-year period after the Korean War, the United States gave South Korea as much economic aid as they gave to the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. They gave us so much aid that the Koreans didn't believe. So it helped them build their roads, their schools, their hospitals. It helped them build their homes for their citizens. So much so that everything was built. They couldn't believe when the money just kept coming. So they worked day and night because they didn't know when to stop. It was not coming. So they worked daytime, worked nighttime. They built everything. When they finished building, then they started building factories. They built the factories, they made everything. When they started making cars, the Americans opened their markets to Korean products. So they were making products and selling it to the Americans. So they moved from an agrarian economy to an industrialized economy within 20 years because money kept coming. Same thing in Japan. They helped Japan as well. So those are the two examples of where economic aid has led to progress, because it doesn't lead to progress. America also went to India and helped them with their mass media. Because the country is so big, they wanted to connect them to reach their people. Help them with their mass media, and they helped them with food self-sufficiency. So that's why India can feed their people and even export food. The United States helped them. Those are the examples I can give. And that's also how those two Asian tigers became so wealthy. They did so with a little help from Uncle Sam. And that is it. But in Africa, there is no example, none, of economic aid leading to food self-sufficiency. No country has gone to a country and said, we'll give you economic aid until you can feed your people. No. Or until you can get electricity. Those are two vital ingredients of progress. For you to progress, you need to be able to feed your people. You need to be able to have cheap electricity. But economic aid doesn't lead to that. It doesn't do that. What they do is cosmetic changes. They support this here, support this little project here. Nothing serious, nothing that leads to any progress. Instead, what economic aid does in Africa today is force the Africans to open their markets to more industrialized products. Yes, it forced them to open their markets. One example I have is the telecoms company in Sierra Leone. There was one called Syriatel. Immediately after, in the late 90s, Syriatel was the most profitable parastater. It made so much money every day. It was the most profitable parastater in Sierra Leone. But Sierra Leone was forced to open that market to foreign competition. So today, Syriatel is a loss maker. It's a shadow of its former self. It's so much a loss maker that the staff are always on strike for unpaid wages. Yes, that's what economic aid does today. That's one. Then two, the EU is trying to force a free trade on African countries. Now they have free trade agreement with 40 African countries. When I was writing this book, I said, no, that's not going to happen. So if you find that under trade agreements, I said, no African country will go and sign a free trade agreement with Europe. That was because I wrote that in 2019. Today, 2025, they have free trade agreement with 40 African countries. A free trade agreement is actually an agreement between a rich country and a poor country. And once you sign it, the rich country forces you to get poorer. It is always between a rich country and a poor country. A rich country comes and forces you to sign a free trade agreement. Once you sign it, your economic situation gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Yes. If anybody wants to sign a free trade agreement, no problem. Go to China. Go to India and sign a free trade agreement with India. Let's see if you like it. They won't. They will go to a country that is not manufacturing anything, like African countries. I told you earlier that only 2% of the world's manufacturing is done in Africa. So the EU goes there and force them. On the free trade agreement, you see their illegal methods used, and one of them is economic aid. They say, we'll give you economic aid if you sign a free trade agreement. It's not only free trade. Free trade means getting rid of all the import taxes, getting rid of all the barriers to trade. So your market is like my market. You can come and sell it to me. But they say, if you don't do it, we will not give you economic aid and we will ban you from our market. But there is no market in Europe. There is nothing there. What does Africa sell to them? If you sell anything to Europe, it's because they don't have it. You sell coffee to them because they can't grow coffee. You sell cacao to them because they can't grow cacao. So what do you sell? You sell bonga in East Street. There is a shop called Kadi Shop. They sell ogiri, kenda, and bitter leaf. Yes. That's what they will ban you from selling. So you will not sell red pamai to them anymore. Yes. Cheap. Dead cheap products. That's what you sell to them. Why they are collapsing your companies. Or in Brixton, there is Kumasi market in Brixton market. They said dried crabs, raw crabs, yes, Ghanaian food. Yes, that's what they said. Very cheap products. That's what you sell to them. But if you didn't sell to them, you have nothing to lose. But African governments have signed. Yes. So you'll see. So as far as I'm concerned, economic aid is a complete scam.